Hello, Michael. I have adopted a new plan, I guess, in the development of my videos. I think from now on I will comment every single one of your video as long as you get linked up to my channel, and you will realize that I can read parts of your mind, and you will find this very strange at first, but I just want you to get interested in my content because I have important things to say, believe it or not. So your video about the traditionalist view of the self. In 2019, I was already trying to share my truth with you, but I guess that I was not mature enough, that I had not developed enough yet. I still have to grow and to develop, but I have improved, one might say. And I posted a comment to illustrate the experience of consciousness that I have had. And it is related to your notion of the self in the traditionalist view, the Atman. And I will list the various steps that I have gone through during my intellectual development. I will just list the steps, then I will briefly comment, and then I will comment on what you say in your video. So here's the commentary that I posted on your channel in 2019. First, you begin in the matrix, what in our ordinary language we call the normies, namely the ordinary world. In the Western world, people live in the matrix, but they don't know this. They just live ordinary lives with an ordinary level of consciousness. And so you are brainwashed. That's the second step, but you don't know that you are brainwashed. The ordinary persons have no idea. Then you detach yourself from this average consciousness. This is what in the language of Hegel we might call the negative, namely differentiation, separation from lack of consciousness. And I listed you become islamophobic, because I take the example of Western Europe, but in America it would be different. But in the realm of Western Europe, it would be you become aware of the question of Islam, radical Islam, the differences of culture, etc., etc., which leads you eventually to becoming a patriot. You become a patriot of your own country, whereas when you were brainwashed, you had no idea of patriotism. You were a citizen of the world. You had no interest in politics, or you were a leftist maybe, but now you become a patriot and you adopt conservative values. And then eventually you become a civic nationalist. That's the alt-right, for instance, in the US, because you turn towards nationalism, but a civic nationalism. There is not yet the question of race. You are not yet aware, or you reject this. And then eventually you learn about feminism, and you become a MGTOW. You become kind of misogynistic by learning about women, etc., etc. You might eventually turn into a libertarian to adopt radical pro-freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of property, capitalism, etc., etc. And you learn then about evolutionary psychology and Darwinism. You become aware that we are self-conscious apes, basically. I am an ape and I can speak. So you understand yourself as a biological creature. And that's the transition between conservatism, libertarianism. The evolutionary psychology is the transition which makes you become aware that eventually you are white. You realize, you are aware that you are white by looking at yourself in the mirror, but you acquire kind of a political consciousness of being white. And then you study race, because there's a distinction between evolutionary psychology and race realism. So you become aware of the question of race, and you become conscious of your ethnic and racial determination. So you become aware that you are not just white, but you are a European Caucasoid, and eventually you determine your ethnicity, Nordic, Central European, whatever. That's the transition towards the alt-right. You mix all these ideas together, biology, white identity, libertarianism, Western conservatism. You mix this all together and you become basically a member of the alt-right. And then eventually you become an anti-Semite because you discover the question of the JQ, which turns you into a national socialist. And you add a European element to it, but basically you are a national socialist. And that's when you start to realize that the entire world is opposed to you, that you are alone with your national socialist friend. And here is the experience of what people call the black pill, what I called gazing into the abyss. I will talk about this later. And this is when you realize that you're kind of desperate. So there's no choice but to try to be stoic, to remain free within your mind. And that's when you encounter traditionalism and you adopt traditionalist values, and you discover eventually paganism, so a religious perspective which was lacking, but now you discover real paganism, spiritual paganism, with people like Varg, etc. And that's when you become aware that you are what the pagans call Óðinn, becoming conscious of himself. That the whole process is the process of Óðinn, the Norse god, becoming conscious of his identity. And then you realize, in a more spiritual, non-particularized in terms of religion, that you are self-conscious cosmic energy. You realize that you are a spiritual being having a human experience. You're not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. And then you discover philosophy. And in the language of Spinoza, you realize that you are a mode of the substance, which is the one being, in relation with everything else in the universe. And then I wrote in the comment, then the you become the I. And I discovered, when I went through the process, that I was the absolute, which in the language of Hegel means that I discovered that I am the subject of the substance. And then you're back into the matrix, the ordinary world. In the language of Plato means you have contemplated the sun outside of the cave, and now you're back into the cave, and you're trying to tell to your fellow slaves that they are being enslaved in the cave. And that's how I experienced my intellectual development in 2019. Now we are more than 3 years later. And what I could briefly say is that each determination of yourself, that you give yourself to yourself, that actually that I gave myself to myself, is in relation with the opposite determination. When you become an Islamophobe, unconsciously you gather knowledge about Islam, the Muslims, the Muslim world, etc. When you become a patriot, you are a patriot in opposition to the globalist or the cosmopolitan. When you are a conservative, you understand yourself as a conservative, but also unconsciously you understand the liberals. When you are a civic nationalist, you're opposed to globalism. MGTOW, you're opposed to feminists, so you understand women. You acquire determinations about how women function, their psyche, the history of feminism, etc. When you are a libertarian, you are opposed to Marxists, so you have the capitalist and the communist perspective on economics. When you understand yourself as a self-conscious ape, you gather the knowledge about Darwinian evolution, and also those who reject Darwinian evolution, but you understand the whole realm of biological life, so you understand yourself and your pre-human ancestors. When you identify as white, white only exists in relation to non-whites, so you become opposed to non-whites, first politically, and then with race realism, you acquire racial knowledge about the whole of mankind, Africans, Mongoloids, and all the various races. When you are in the alt-right, you are determined in opposition to the far left, or maybe the left in general, and even the conservative. When you become an anti-Semite, you understand the Jews, the Jewish history, the Jewish mindset, etc., etc. When you are a National Socialist, you are opposed basically to everyone else, but you understand the history of 20th century Europe, and the consequences still are prevalent today. You understand the banking system, you understand many things, but you realize that you are kind of alone against the rest of the world. And when you fall into the abyss, who are you in relation with? Who do you confront in the abyss? Well, Nietzsche knew that you confront yourself. At the bottom of the abyss, there is a mirror. That's what I discovered. So, yeah. So, you just have to accept or try to live with your reflection in the mirror, because you realize that you thought you were the good guys, but actually when you are on the national socialist path, you think you are the good guys, but actually when you adopt the opposite perspective, which eventually can only be seen through the mediation of a mirror, you realize that you are a monster. Yeah. And then traditionalism, paganism, Óðinn, self-conscious cosmic energy, spiritual being, Spinozian mode of the substance, and eventually the absolute. And the absolute is only in relation to itself. And I discovered that I am only in relation to myself, and that I am the totality of all these determinations, which, because they exist only in relation to their opposites, I am also the totality of the opposite determinations. So I am the left and the right, the conservative and the liberals, whites and non-whites, Jews and Nazis, me and my reflection in the mirror, which is at the bottom of the abyss, basically. So, yeah. And that's the phenomenology of spirit. And the reason why I have decided to make videos for you in particular, Michael, is that because you are the person in this process of spirit becoming conscious of itself. You are the concept, because you are a concept. Now, many years later, I understood that you are a concept, meaning you have a universal self, which is identical to my universal self. You have particular determinations, which are similar to my particular determinations. You have a singular empirical existence, which is different to any other. But I am trying to share my truth, which is absolute truth, with you, because you are the concept which is more similar to me at this moment in time. And I have realized that I could take any conscious human on the planet, and if I had many years to waste, I could make a scholarly explanation, explaining him the totality of world knowledge and explaining why he is a reflection of myself, but that would be a waste of time. So I have to go to the point, and that's why I make videos for you, Michael, because you are the reflection which, at this moment, when I'm making the video, is the more awakened, to speak in ordinary language. And yeah. So I will continue to comment your video about the traditionalist view of the self. That's just my perspective in a short amount of time. I will do this when I can. But Here's you have your answer. What you ask yourself in the video, to which I put a link in the description. You say that the Atman is non-particularized, non-individualized. It is meaningless because it has no relation. But I have given you very broadly many relations, because the Atman, as you call this, which is the absolute self, is the process of entering into relationship with the totality of being. And that's how the absolute determines itself and gathers knowledge about itself. And yeah. So, yeah. That was just an introduction. I will continue to produce videos for you until you get my message eventually.